Hi, I'm Blair, and welcome to another edition of Cellar Notes. Today we're going to talk about port wines. And joining us today is Les Hill, the fine wine director from Phillips Wine and Spirits. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Blair. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. First of all, we're going to talk, well, specifically, we're going to talk about port wines and then some of the differences. First of all, can you tell us exactly what is a port wine?
So port wine was something, actually, the history of it was started because of the British. The British were at war with the French and were not getting their wine. And Portugal and Spain kind of came together with their entrance into the category, and the British found out about this sweet dessert, kind of a sweeter ripe wine that was, the fermentation was stopped. With brandy, in the production of wine, one of the things you allow it to ferment, and it ferments to dry, and they poured brandy into it to stop the fermentation process. And there was still some residual sweetness. So this sweet wine started coming to Britain, and the British community fell in love with it. And, you know, whereas sherry is before dinner, which is from Spain, port from Portugal, which is now Porto, is for after dinner most of the time.
I see. So what they do is they use regular fermentation practices, and then stop it early to keep some of the residual sugars in, and use a grape-based alcohol to stop that fermentation and raise the alcohol level.
Exactly.
Now, does that assist and help with the transport and longevity of the port?
Yeah, in fact, that is what allows port to be kept at room temperature. In fact, if you notice when you look at the bottle has a cork in it.
Oh.
So which is really cool, because now you can open this, put it right with your gin, vodka, or whiskey in your house, and it's good for anywhere. Well, I've actually managed to stretch one out an ounce at a time for about 8 months.
Oh, fantastic. So they'll last quite a while. They'll last a long time after you open one. It's not like a regular bottle of wine where you should drink it in the next couple of days.
No, the only case of that would be the vintage wine and the late bottle vintage. With vintage wine, it has an actual real cork, and once you open it up, it starts to change.
I see. Also, can you tell us a little bit about the differences between the kinds of ports? I know the two most popular ones that we have in the store are Ruby Port and Tawny Port. Tell us about the differences. I don't know if it's a difference in style, color, flavor.
No, basically, it's a difference in there's a couple differences. One is occasionally they use different grapes for Tawny and for Ruby. And the biggest difference with Tawny is it's aged longer in oak, whereas the Ruby is bottle aged. It's actually aged, some rubies are aged anywhere up to 3 or 4 years in oak, just to soften them a little bit so that they're ready to drink now, and then they're put in the bottle. And they actually don't allow oxygen to impact the rubies when they're making a ruby. With the Tawny, it's not a concern. With a Tawny, it's been oak aged anywhere from 3 to 7 years. The one we have today is actually 4 years. And what that does then is give you a softer than the color difference, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Okay, fantastic. I noticed that some of them say port and some of them say Porto. Can you tell us what the difference is there?
Yeah, you're familiar with the whole thing with champagne.
Absolutely.
You can only call it a champagne if it's from the area in France called Champagne.
Correct.
All the others are considered sparkling wine, and they may be made in the method champenois. Well, a few years back, Portugal wanted to do the same thing, because there were a lot of people producing port all over the world. You'll notice we have an Australian port here, a Tawny port. We also have one from California. In fact, on my trips to California, you can find out a lot of the secrets of winemakers, that they have like little secret stashes of port. Like that's their favorite thing to make and have fun with. And you'll notice today we have one from Beringer from Napa Valley. And those, they have become, you know, popular. People really like them. And the difference, so then the Portuguese were like, well, wait a minute, we're losing all these sales. So how do we differentiate ourselves? And they came up with the idea that because port goes through the town of Oporto, so if you have Portugal as looking as a strip, you have the Douro River that comes down, known as the Douro Valley. At the bottom where it hits the ocean is Oporto, O-P-O-R-T-O. So the Portuguese said, well, great, let's put another O at the end of the word port, and people will know that that's Portuguese because it's from, and it has to go through the town of Oporto. In fact, there's kind of a funny, if you're ever visiting Portugal and you go to Oporto, you'll see these barges with some of the port houses flags just sitting there, and they're just at anchor rocking back and forth. Because back in the 1800s, when they were shipping it to Britain, some of the port houses got smart with a little marketing idea saying ship aged, and they'd actually take longer to get there. And it actually impacted the flavor, because if you imagine the port swishing back and forth in this, you know, oak
the contact
cask.
with the oak.
Right. So now to reenact that, because it would be very expensive to ship it back and forth, they just leave the barges and they get affected by the tide, and they call that ship aged.
It's a pretty neat plan.
Very affordable and a good place to store it. You don't have to have a warehouse.
I know that there's very specific grapes that the Portuguese use to produce their Portos, and I won't ask you to name them here, but I know that you can make Porto almost out of any grape. Is that true? I know that the Beringer we have, I think, is made from Cabernet. I know that Zinfandel, we've had Zinfandel ports before. I know the Australians use different grapes as well. So once you're outside Porto or Portugal, you don't necessarily have to keep using those particular grapes. Correct?
Right. If you'll notice on the bottle here, there's a stamp, and this is one of the things that it goes literally through a community that says this has the right grape. It follows our rules and regulations to be called Porto. And the rest of the world, it's not so. So basically, any red wine could become a port.
I see. We've got a couple examples here. I think one is a Tawny and one is a Ruby. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. The one on the left over here is Tawny, and the one on the right is Ruby.
Now the Ruby does look darker, a deeper red color.
Yep.
This is a little more, I don't know if you'd call it brackish or brick-like.
Yep.
A little bit more transparent and a little bit browner, maybe brown-red kind of color.
Yeah.
And that's the main color difference between the two. And what about the flavor difference then? Would this one be fruitier and this one be nuttier? Or?
Yes, exactly. In fact, some people say that Tawny ports take on caramel and nut and also some orange characteristics, kind of a little bit in that Grand Marnier style towards the deep burnt orange flavors. Very, very nice. And then Ruby is just like late bottle vintage and vintage. Late bottle vintage is a minimum of 6 years in the bottle, and vintage is anywhere right away from 6 years and up to 50 years in a bottle.
All right, now for the good part. Now, ports, as you said, are often drank as an after-dinner dessert type wine.
Yes.
You've made me this little concoction before, and it's fabulous. Can you throw a couple together and tell us what you're doing and what kind of flavor profiles you're looking at here?
Sure. Actually, I actually made it by accident. I was doing a wine tasting, and it was out of boredom that I kind of threw these ingredients together and tried them with port, and the combination is extraordinary. So basically, original wheat thin and a nice blue cheese. In fact, all the money should be spent on the blue cheese. And then just good old plain Nestle semi-sweet chocolate chips. And anywhere, as if you can fit 6 or 7 onto and just kind of squish them on. And then the idea is, so there's that, and I'll make myself one here, of course. The idea with this tasting, it's kind of fun to do with people as a dessert, and as I said before, very affordable. But the idea is to put this whole thing and just kind of pop this whole thing in your mouth and chew it and add a little bit of the port and blend it in your mouth. And it is fabulous.
What does it remind you of?
It reminds me of an Italian dessert called tiramisu. And if you're familiar with tiramisu, it's it's not a surprise. Tiramisu is made up with cocoa, mascarpone cheese, and sponge cake. And then the ingredient that now, for our demonstration, is Porto, is sherry, which makes up tiramisu. And so If you like tiramisu, this is definitely something that you'll love. And I'm happy to say I've turned a lot of people that didn't like blue cheese into loving blue cheese. A lot of people that didn't like port into loving port out of this little concoction.
And only when they have them together. Les, I want to thank you very much for being with us today.
You're welcome.
You're really a fountain of information. We appreciate it.